Today we are talking about the cold start, what it means, how to do it right, and why some of the most common advice you hear is actually damaging your bike. We all love the sound of a motorcycle firing up, but what exactly is happening inside your engine when it's been sitting all night? But before we start, let's clear something up. We hear a lot of influencers saying, I always cold start my engine. I don't drive without cold starting. This is completely ridiculous because no one can. Cold start in itself is definitely not an optional thing, and it's not a process on its own. In the mechanical world, cold simply means the engine is at ambient temperature or the surrounding temperature. It hasn't been run recently. The metals being cold haven't expanded yet. The engine oil is still cold and as such more viscous or thick. It has also drained into its sump or the oil pan. So it's not available at the parts of the engine which will be experiencing a lot of friction. So what if the engine is cold? What makes this different? First, because the oil is still in the sump or the oil pan, it's not available at the regions which will be experiencing high amount of friction when the engine starts. Two, because the engine oil has higher viscosity. Viscosity is simply shear stress or shear rate. In simple terms, it is the resistance to flow. A higher viscosity fluid will find it more difficult to flow than lower viscosity fluid. And no, like some people assume, a 0W50 oil, for example, is not less viscous at winter or cold temperature than it is at hot temperature. If you want me to elaborate on how the rating system of engine oils work and how viscosity varies with temperature, drop a comment. I'll make a video on that. So the engine oil is always more viscous when it's cold. And having a higher viscosity than what your engine's clearances were designed for is definitely not a good thing. Other than this, during a cold start, because the engine is cold, the fuel doesn't vaporize easily. Your engine needs a richer mixture, meaning more fuel and less air. But however, in the current fuel injected engines, this is handled by the ECU, which enriches your air fuel mixture during the start. You don't have to worry about it like in the older carbureted engines with a choke. So this brings us to one of the myths about cold starting. Some people believe that FI engines does not need a gentle cold start. So the myth is that you don't need to worry about cold starting a FI engine, and this was only a concern for carbureted engines. This is not true, because though your air fuel mixture is handled by the ECU in a FI engine, you still do need to worry about the oil reaching the operating temperatures and the metal expanding at its working temperature. Of course, this will happen a little faster on the newer engines than on the older engines. The other myth is that revving the engine will help it warm up faster. If you are doing this, please stop. When you first start the engine, as it was said, the oil is still not at the place where it should be to protect the engine. So if you immediately blip the throttle or rev the engine, you are forcing metal parts to rub together at high speeds without proper lubrication. So let bike find its own idle and wait for it to warm up. So how do you know that it has been warmed up? In the KTM 390s, you have the symbol which shows that the temperature of the coolant is below its operating temperature. So how do you actually start the engine in the correct way? Let's see. The correct procedure for starting the engine. First, you switch on the ignition and wait. You can hear the fuel pump working for about 2 seconds. The function test of the instrument console is run at the same time. Don't press the start button until this. So on the KTM console, you get ready to race. On most of the other bikes also, you will have a visual indication when this is done. When the fuel pump sound stops, your engine is ready to be started. So press the starter and your engine is on. And let this find its own idle. This is a symbol on the KTM 390s which shows that the current temperature of the coolant is below its desired operating temperature. So just sit and wait. Within a minute or two, depending on your ambient temperature, coolant will be reaching 60 degrees. That is when this light switches off. And here your temperature of the oil may be roughly around 30 degrees or so, again depending on the ambient temperature. So now your bike is ready to be driven. Though I personally prefer to wait until the oil temperature is around 40 degrees Celsius. And this still does not mean you can accelerate and rev your engine to its red line. In fact, until the oil reaches its ideal operating temperature, you need to keep the revs low. But you can keep driving. In fact, the newly launched RTX 300 of TVS has this active red line movement, which shows what is the safe RPM for the current engine temperature. So you can use this as a rough reference if you want the initial period until you get to know your bike. Once your engine temperature is well above 90 degrees or 100 degrees, your engine oil is at its designed viscosity. Your engine is working as per its design, and you are free to rev away. So we'll be posting a lot of other important information about knowing your bike. Subscribe and follow for more such useful and interesting information. Thank you.